Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here because we are diving into a topic that honestly reads like a legal thriller. As a bit of a legal history nerd myself, I absolutely love digging into how the invisible systems around us were actually built. Today, we're exploring a deeply fascinating analysis of modern capitalism, and we're going to unpack its most defining yet totally hidden mystery, and that is the complete and utter disappearance of the accountable owner. Right off the bat, consider this incredibly powerful idea from our source material. The owner disappears, leaving behind only paper. Really think about that for a second. Today, when we see massive environmental destruction or when vulnerable communities face rapid housing displacement, finding a single responsible human being to actually answer for it is nearly impossible. And why is that? It's because liability just sort of dissipates across this massive web of legal entities. The actual human owner vanishes, and literally all that's left is a paper trail.
So here is our historical syllabus for today's explainer. 1. The phantom of ownership. 2. Crusaders and medieval loopholes. 3. The evolution of asset shielding. 4. Trusts versus corporations. 5. The architecture of the shadow state. And finally, 6. When abstraction fails. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The phantom of ownership.
Okay, we need to completely reframe how we think about ownership. We really have to stop seeing the modern owner as a flesh and blood person and start seeing them as a carefully engineered structure that's specifically designed to completely sever control from accountability. So let's dive into this question. Why does the owner disappear? I want you to think about your own life for a minute. Have you ever tried to figure out who actually owns your apartment building? Or, who exactly owns the parent company of your internet provider? It's astonishingly difficult. And our source points out that this is absolutely not an accident. It's not a glitch in the system. It is the result of centuries of very deliberate, careful legal engineering.
Section 2. Crusaders and medieval loopholes.
To find the smoking gun of this entire legal architecture, we actually need to rewind the clock way back to the Middle Ages. We're going to see where the trust, which is the ultimate tool for all of this, was born. And spoiler alert, it wasn't some grand financial master plan. It was just a highly practical workaround. Imagine you're an English noble in the 12th century. The structural dilemma of your era is basically this. Owning land means you owe direct feudal obligations to the crown. We're talking military service, taxes, fealty. But what happens if you need to leave England to go fight in a crusade for years? Or, well, if you happen to die out there? How do you manage the land and protect it from the king when you are physically absent?
Well, the brilliant yet frankly kind of devious solution was a medieval legal arrangement known as ad opus, which translates to for the use of. This is the foundational technology of distance. It allowed an intermediary, say a trusted friend or the church, to hold the official legal title to the land, while the crusader or his family retained what's called the beneficial enjoyment of it. By splitting ownership into two separate pieces like this, property could suddenly function completely without the physical presence or the accountability of its actual owner. It effectively shielded the wealth from the sovereign claims of the crown. Pretty clever, right?
And watch how this builds across history into a massive game of legal whack-a-mole. So the English crown eventually realized it was losing a ton of taxes and control. To stop this, in 1536, King Henry VIII passed the Statute of Uses to basically crush this fragmented ownership. But lawyers are clever. Almost instantly, by the late 16th century, they invented the use upon a use, a layered evasion that the new law just couldn't touch. The trust didn't die out, it just went deeper underground and became a highly refined instrument of total opacity.
Section 3. Evolution of asset shielding.
Bringing the timeline forward and jumping across the Atlantic, we can see how this inherently aristocratic tool mutated once it reached the young American Republic. Now, in America, there was no official aristocracy to protect, obviously, but American courts fully embraced trust law anyway. Instead of protecting feudal lords, trusts quietly transformed into mechanisms for oligarchic continuity. They became the ultimate tools for structural asset insulation. They shielded immense wealth from creditors, from taxation, and from political redistribution, allowing wealth to be permanently protected across multiple generations. And this brilliantly illustrates a absolutely crucial shift in language and law. Consider how the whole concept of equity changed. Originally, legal equity was all about fairness. It was courts of conscience stepping in to enforce intent and do the right moral thing when the rigid common law failed. But over time, it morphed into economic equity. It became about ownership claims, financial priority, and a technology of pure capital accumulation. So a doctrine originally meant to ensure moral fairness was historically weaponized to justify and protect financial hoarding.
Section 4. Trusts versus corporations. This brings us to a really fascinating concept detailed in the text, legal speciation. Just like animals evolved different traits for survival, capitalism evolved different legal entities to perform very different functions in its life cycle. So the crucial point here is understanding the difference between the two main species of capital. On one side, you have the corporation. It's active, it's highly visible in public markets, it's productive, and critically, it's exposed to liability. Its entire job is to accumulate capital. But on the other side, you have the trust. The trust is passive, totally invisible, inward-facing, and heavily shielded by private law. Its job isn't to make wealth, its job is to permanently consolidate and govern it.
I absolutely love how the source material captures this realization. From corpse to phantom, the trust is the afterlife of ownership. Unlike a corporation, a trust has no face, no body, and no lifespan. Because it operates as a phantom form of power, it is entirely immune to being imprisoned, it cannot be shamed in the press, and it completely avoids being meaningfully taxed. It is, quite literally, power without accountability.
Section 5. Architecture of the shadow state.
Now let's shift our focus to the mature architecture of capital. We're seeing how these medieval abstractions of property without presence eventually built what our source calls the modern shadow state. At the absolute heart of this shadow state is the holding company. You see, holding companies don't just optimize profits, they function as private constitutions. They govern vast economic empires while perfectly insulating the ultimate owners from risk. By nesting subsidiaries, they localize all the losses and liabilities way down at the bottom, while centralizing all the profits right at the top. And because their rules are written in private trust deeds and shareholder agreements, they operate entirely separated from any democratic accountability or popular revision.
Let's walk through this labyrinth together. Step 1. A shell corporation owns a physical asset, maybe a massive block of housing. Step 2. A second shell corporation, located in a totally different legal jurisdiction, owns that first shell. Step 3. An unlocatable, completely invisible trust controls that entire stacked structure. This stacking is not a loophole, folks. It is the deliberate circulatory system of modern capital, designed from the ground up to make tracing actual responsibility an absolute impossibility. And the geography of this system is totally modular through something called jurisdiction shopping. Capital literally selects its legal regimes the same way nations used to select military allies. You incorporate in Delaware for the corporate veil, you bank in London, you set up tax residency in the Cayman Islands. Sovereignty is basically reduced to a service. And because capital can seamlessly exit a country at any given time, laws and policies are constantly being rewritten by governments simply in anticipation of capital's departure.
Section 6. When abstraction fails. This brings us to our final act, addressing the dark reality underlying all of these paper abstractions and procedural compliances. You see, this shadow state governs incredibly well, but only as long as compliance is maintained, as long as the math works on paper. But eventually, economic abstractions hit hard, physical limits. A tenant literally cannot pay rent. A debtor completely defaults on their loans. A worker physically resists discipline. In these specific moments, legal architecture and risk models alone can no longer compel obedience. So I want to leave you pondering this incredibly chilling final question. What actually happens when abstraction fails? What really backs up this phantom wealth when the contracts, the credit scores, and the nested shell companies just no longer work to ensure compliance? The answer our source reveals is profound. When paper fails to compel obedience, the system reveals its ultimate backstop, the state's monopoly on physical force. Behind the masks, behind the invisible trusts, behind the endless labyrinth of shell companies lies the very real threat of physical state coercion. We're talking courts, evictions, police, and prisons. The paper shields the wealth, but force guarantees it. It really makes you wonder, who actually governs the world you live in? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.